All right, everybody. We have Barbara Hand Clow is returning with us today. I am super excited to talk with you again, Barbara. I want to give you a quick little introduction. So, Barbara is an internationally renowned astrologer, author, researcher, known for her pioneering work bridging astrology, spirituality, multidimensional consciousness. Barbara has written numerous influential books, including The Pleiadian Agenda, Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, Catastrophobia. These books explore the evolution of human awareness and Earth's cosmic cycles. With decades of experience interpreting planetary alignments and their influence on collective transformation, Barbara offers profound insights into astrology as a tool for personal awakening and planetary healing. Barbara, it's great to have you back on. How are you today?
I'm great, and it's great to be back again.
Yeah, I've been, I always get very excited, and I've made some friends now in this space. And when I tell them that you're coming back on the show, they get very excited as well. And
That's
they always give me questions that they want to kind of ask you. So they're quite intrigued with your immense breadth of work that have accumulated. I read your quarterly reading that you put out in mid-September, and you touch on Three Eye Atlas, which is this huge interstellar object that's apparently passing through our solar system. And there's been a lot of talk about it. You know, what is it? Where did it come from? Is it natural? Is it man-made? What's going on? I want to get your perspective on this because this is a big talking point at the moment.
yeah. Well, since it was announced that the astronomers first saw it on July 1st, I instantly felt that it was terribly important, and I instantly locked onto it to the point where I almost drove my husband crazy because I had to see every single scientific analysis and report. I had to do a tremendous learning curve on astrophysics in order to comprehend what this might mean. And then now, as more time has gone by, as you can see in my fall equinox reading, I do feel that this is like a messenger from the galaxy, a messenger in the galaxy. And I really feel like this has come at an incredibly important time. And throughout my work and career, I've basically not tended to ask the Pleiadians for help. I have kind of a hybrid lifetime. This lifetime, I'm kind of half human and half a person living on Alcyon, which is the central star of the Pleiades. And I've been very, very open about that because of my Native American background, where my grandfather, who was my teacher, simply taught me that I was from the Pleiades. And so it's never seemed unnatural to me, even though I've received some interesting comments about it. But at the same time, even though I'm kind of a dual citizen in a sense, I have never tended to ask for help. And suddenly now I see, with the appearance of Three Eye Atlas, that help is being sent here. And I don't mean that people are going to land and fix everything up or anything like that. I think what we're getting a boost in is a real cosmic upgrade to help us understand that we are not the only beings who are living in this solar system and living on this planet. And so I think my fall equinox report was all about the idea that people should consider opening their consciousness to this, whatever it is, interstellar craft or whatever it is. The people should open their consciousness to it. And the way to do that is being beautifully developed by a lot of other teachers, like Heather Ensworth, for example, where we're dealing with the issue of what does it mean when Three Eye Atlas goes by Mars? And I'd like to address that in a minute because it just happened. But then how does it work when it goes by Venus? How does it function when it goes by the Earth? What happens when it's close to the sun? We understand our solar system quite well. We understand that Venus is the principle, for instance, of attraction and love and beauty. And so we have tools for interpreting the meaning of each passage. And I think we've already gotten proof of the meaningfulness of that approach, and as well as really a greater understanding of how this is going to be working with the flyby by Mars, because Mars, of course, is known to rule war and aggression and great use of power on this planet. And if we look at the events that occurred during the time of the Mars flyby, such as a potential ceasefire in Gaza, we can really see that something shifted in a lot of people's minds when 3i Atlas contacted Mars. And then, of course, as you and I both know, because we've discussed it, there's a deeper data bank about what's going on with Mars in terms of Mars being a previous civilization connected with Earth. And so this is just like a loaded moment in time, because there's a lot of people on this planet who really took it seriously when we discovered that a lot of the monuments on Mars are not natural. They're made by somebody. And more significantly, they're very deeply connected to a lot of the sacred sites on our planet, such as Avebury and Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid and things like that. So this is like a incredibly huge moment in time. And so this morning, the first thing I did is I checked NBC News, and guess what? They finally mentioned it, even though
They mentioned.
millions of people are curious about what's going on here. But of course, they debunked it by saying that some people think this could be a craft of some sort, a man or be, a non-natural creation. And of course, they just said, well, there's absolutely no scientific proof for that. And that's when I really cracked up over NBC News, because there's more scientific proof that this is a engineered and created object by someone. And there's plenty of proof that it's not a comet. Because the argument is it a comet? Is it a spaceship? And so I just cracked up when NBC News tried to debunk it by saying they might have said there's little scientific proof, but they know they had to say there's no scientific proof. And there's plenty already.
Yeah, Dr. Avi Loeb from Harvard, I think he's head of astronomy there, is championing this 3i Atlas and saying we cannot write this off automatically as some natural thing that's coming into the solar system. I think he was looking at the likelihood that it would pass by several of the planets in our solar system the way that it's doing. He thinks is highly improbable. And so whatever it is, it's the trajectory and the behavior of it is a little bit too coincidental as far as he's concerned. And so to say that there's no evidence that it's possibly something more anomalous, I think is not true. There is some evidence, but what it's going to do, how it's going to behave is still, I guess, yet to be seen. But I'm wondering, is the bigger idea that people just start thinking about it and just start having a conversation about it? Does that alone open up some people's awareness to a bigger picture?
Oh, definitely. And I was really fascinated during the 1990s and 2000s regarding the structures that have been found on Mars. And so then in one of the reports, I think from NASA, regarding things going on with 3i Atlas, there was discussion about the idea that it might be changing its trajectory either to hit Mars or to interact and possibly land on the Elysium Planitia, which is a part of Mars that has a lot of obviously not natural structures. Well, boy, that got me right to my library where I had 6 or 8 books on the Mars question from 20 to 30 years ago. So this is going to blow that whole discussion wide open, the discussion of what's going on with Mars, first of all, and just in terms of what's located there. But then the big question is, since the structures are the same as a lot of the sacred structures on our planet, what's our relationship with the Martians? Are we a whole bunch of Martians who had to leave and come to the Earth? Or what's the relationship going on here? And this is not going to go away this time because of the face on Mars. Remember that?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah,
had Dr. Mark Carlotto on right around the same time I had you on, because he did some excellent geometric work on the face on Mars, showing 30, 60, 90 special right triangles. And I know you're fully aware of that, having read Mary Bennett's book.
Yeah. And also Fibonacci spirals. And there's just so much proof based on geometry that this was the same culture. And one of the things that I wrote about in Catastrophobia was I tackled this issue in Catastrophobia a little bit because I think it's so deeply related to cycles of cataclysms and catastrophes on our planet. And I just said point blank that one of the ways NASA and a lot of the scientists deflected people's curiosity about the connection between Mars geometrical structures and the ones on Earth was by making it look like the structures on Mars were built around, they said, millions of years ago. Well, anybody who knows anything about dust storms and what goes on in the solar system in terms of comets and asteroids, etc., knows that it's a miracle there's anything on Mars. And so I kept focusing on, okay, well, let's get clear about when these structures were probably constructed on Mars. And I think it's between 13 and 15,000 years ago. And so,
Really? You put it that recently?
yes,
Okay.
because we're realizing on our planet that the structures are a lot older. Like a structure like Avebury, maybe it was constructed only, let's see, about 5,000 years ago. But there are so many signs of things at the sacred sites that are much, much older than that, especially the gigantic polygonal walls all over the planet. So the person who really deflected this whole thing is an astrophysicist whom I respect and admire, named Tom von Flandern. And Tom von Flandern just simply said point blank, there was a great big cataclysm in this solar system 3 million years ago. And that was when this sort of thing, and then when people try to date these structures on Mars back to millions of years ago, they tended to think that it had something to do with the cataclysm that occurred in the solar system 3 million years ago, when in fact we have plenty of evidence for a series of very big cataclysms in the solar system between 15 and 13,000 years ago. So I strongly suspect that these structures on Mars were from before that cataclysmic cycle. And that, of course, Earth was also very affected by it. But our atmosphere wasn't destroyed. The really interesting thing about Mars is whatever happened, and I think 15,000 years ago, stripped away the atmosphere, which is interesting. That would probably suggest an asteroid just blew their atmosphere off the surface,
Right.
something like that.
Very interesting. That's interesting that you feel that it's not that old. That's the first time I've heard that. Because like you said, most accounts are people saying that whatever those things are there, they're like 500,000 to 1,000,000 years old. So that's interesting, and that kind of makes sense. I've heard the other thing I've heard recently is that they think that the culture that could have been there may have been simultaneous cultures here on Earth and there at the same time.
I
And
think,
so, I mean, that's a wild thing to say, but yet if you look at all the geometric connections of those very odd looking structures, I would say particularly in the Cydonia region, there's too many of them there for it to be a coincidence, in my opinion. One or two anomalies you could probably write off as a fluke, but it's just loaded with structures that don't look natural, that are aligned to highly geometric specific things that we find here on Earth that we know are real examples.
Yeah.
There's too many connections there to write that off. And I think one of these days, hopefully in my lifetime, I'll get to see boots on the ground there to really do an archaeological dig and really hammer this home because, like you said, I don't think this conversation is going anywhere.
Yeah, and another thing that I think is really funny, I've been doing a lot of laughing the last couple of months at scientists, because I think one of the reasons they were so determined to not get the public able to start to see these deep connections is that they can't get to Mars. And at this point, with the science that we have on our planet, we don't have the capacity to send people to Mars and have them build pyramids and sacred sites and stuff like that. So, like, how come, since we're so advanced, remember the paradigm on Earth is that at this point we are the most advanced we've ever been in our human experience, which is just laughable because this is the
Yeah.
most unadvanced we've ever been, particularly regarding war. And that's why I think this Mars issue is so important. That's why I think learning as much as we can right now is pretty important.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to bring up here in that book you sent me that I just started reading, Mary Bennett's book, Alien Intelligence: The Pathway to Mars. It's it's clear now that that there are rudimentary skills of getting off world using rockets. I mean, if you just look at it at first glance, it takes so much fuel just to get you off of the planet. Then you would have to have refueling stations like in orbit to replace most of the fuel you just burned. I think it's some crazy number like 85% of the fuel just to get you out there. You'd have to replace that in order to go just get maybe to a little ways to Mars. It's a huge problem that I don't think is going to be solved with traditional rocketry.
No,
There's probably some form of exotic way of absorbing propulsion in the ambient space around you to continue that propulsion.
mhm.
Because traditional rocketry, I think, might get you there, but it's going to be a horrible trip for anybody that signs up for that
Well, it'll kill them.
because of radiation.
Yeah, it just because of radiation and things that are in the solar wind, it's not possible to send humans to Mars in that way. And then another thing, just to crack a joke, as I understand it, you live in Florida, and with the amount of propellant that they're using and the kinds of things they're doing with the rockets, if they keep on going the way they are, they're going to blow away Florida.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, it's
in other words,
amazing.
we've reached such a point of absurdity at this point in the paradigm that it's going to be pretty easy to go to the next level now. And we couldn't 20, 30 years ago. There just weren't enough people who really were curious enough or wanted to think this all the way through. But the number of people now who are curious about what this all might mean is huge. And I think part of what Three Eye Atlas is, in a sense, is almost like a cosmic cheerleader, because if it just keeps rolling in and keeps on triggering new thought, it's just going to change everything. And then astrologically, Matt, this all coincides, as I said in this fall equinox report, with the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. Now, that just can't be accidental. These big Saturn Neptune conjunctions are every 2 to 5,000 years, and they are known for creating a new spiritual cycle of consciousness on our planet. And the best example of that is there was a conjunction of, now, by the way, this isn't just Saturn and Neptune. This is Saturn and Neptune in Aries. This is what's important about it. In
Can
other
you
words,
explain to
Saturn,
everybody what that means? So is that like in the
yeah,
like the
right.
spring? Is that what that means?
Yeah, and what it means is that it takes Saturn and Neptune around 3,000 years, 5,000 years, because it changes quite widely. But to come back to the point where they come together and conjunct in the sky, and early Aries is the key, because Aries is the beginning of the zodiac, and Aries is the initiating energy for human consciousness regarding the archetypes of the zodiac. And so when it happens in Aries, a whole new cycle develops that then goes on for thousands of years. And the best example of this is back in the time of Greek Enlightenment around 400 or 500 BC, when we had the Buddha showed up on our planet, Zoroaster showed up on our planet, the various Greek teachers, Plato and Socrates, a great number of wise teachers came to our planet, and our culture went through like an enlightenment phase before up to 0 AD. So that's a really good example of it. I say it's a good example because we have a lot of information about it. Everybody agrees that for some weird reason, all these spiritual teachers just showed up. It's happening now again because Saturn and Neptune conjunct exact in 0 degrees Aries in February 20th, 2026. So they came
Fascinating.
pretty close during the summer and fall, but then the exact conjunction is February 2026. And this time period is the same time period as the visitation of Three Eye Atlas.
That's very interesting. It's also around the same time. I'm not sure if you follow this gentleman, but there's a gentleman, Chris Bledsoe, who is known for inviting sort of orbs of lights into his purview, and he's got loads of videos showing this.
Mhm.
He said that he was given some sort of telepathic communication from an entity he calls the Lady, who
Mhm.
said that in Easter of 2026, which is right around the time you're talking, that
Mhm.
there will be a moment when the star Regulus is over the gaze of the Sphinx, that there will be a new era, basically. I mean, that's another interesting anecdote from this gentleman who has proof of inviting these orbs into
Mhm.
his view, and he's got loads of videos. So I find that interesting. Um, you also write about like the discoveries under the Giza Plateau, under Romania and the Bucisi Mountains, which we talked about in our first interview.
Mhm.
And then also in the Montana megaliths, which I want to talk about. Can you explain how this is like sort of triggering what you call 2D memory? And can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I will. And I also would like to say that Regulus is right on my rising sign. And so
Uh,
I really resonate with this because Regulus is known as to be the star that brings the king forth. Well, it isn't about kings, it's just about teachers, and as you know, a lot of teachers are really coming forth right now. So back to the Giza Plateau and the Bucegi Mountains and the megaliths in Montana, we have been experiencing during this year, this was March of 2025, we got a significant report from a group of Italian scientists who had been working with ground penetrating radar over the Giza Plateau in order to be able to see down deep. And the type of technology that they use, called SARS technology, can penetrate down a couple of miles. And so they discovered, lo and behold, they caught images, which I've there was a big fight about it as soon as it came forth. A lot of people who normally would tend to agree with this idea, such as Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins, even they were deeply questioning whether this was real or not. And they've since come around, they've examined the technology, and they believe that the Italian scientists have discovered something real. So we just got another big confirmation of this one, of this issue of whether this technology under the Giza Plateau is actually a real thing. And this is a significant one for me personally, as well as philosophically, as you'll see in a minute, because the two come to a meeting point in something that just occurred. Did you ever read The Giza Power Plant by Chris Dunn?
I'm aware of that book. I've got it in my queue. I haven't read that one yet.
Okay. Well, you can, I'll get a free copy for you from the publisher because you should know about this. And so Chris Dunn is a friend of mine, and because he showed up at Barron Company, where I used to be the acquisitions editor, and he showed up with this manuscript about the Giza Plateau and that the Great Pyramid is a power plant. I read it very carefully, and I really resonated with it. Now, this is back in, I think, 1995, something we're back in the 90s. And so I was in a position at Barron Company if I wanted to just say, we got to publish that. And I rarely did that. It was usually group decision, but I went to the meetings and all that. And I said, I don't care when anybody says, we got to publish this. And I was the laughing stock of the company. And when the book came out, poor Chris Dunn, who's an engineer in Chicago and a real straightforward guy, got a whole lot of flack and all that kind of stuff. But over the last 30 years, a lot of scientists have taken a serious look at Chris Dunn's work. So then the next thing that happened, needless to say, with the announcement by the Italian scientists in March about the structures under the Giza Plateau, since Chris had examined the pyramid itself, this was of great interest to him. So he got involved with the Italian scientists and just attended a conference on the Giza Plateau in Italy a couple of weeks ago. And at that conference, he studied all the evidence that the group had brought through. And he announced, gave a talk, and just said, they're right. This is real. And this is basically what it is. Because you see, being an engineer and having already examined the pyramid, what he could see, and I just had emailed with him about it, what he could see is that if you had resonators of the type that these Italian scientists detected 2 miles under the Giza Plateau, once you built that pyramid, which after all was no mean feat, and once you got that power plant going, if you had those resonators under the ground, and in Chris's book 30 years ago, he did mention, I remember, that there was some kind of tectonic resonation with the pyramid, but he didn't know what it was at the time. And he just said point blank, if you build it that way and set up the resonators underground, your power plant is going to go for a couple of thousand years or more. Now, that's a pretty good deal. How would you like to own that pyramid?
and I've heard Chris say this multiple times on other podcasts, and this was way before that the Italians, Filippo Biondi and Carlotta Malenga, I think his name is, before they came out and they with this report. So you're right. He was speculating that there was some sort of things that you would put underneath the pyramid that would, have seismic vibration and would somehow release electrons up through it and then focus it towards the top for some sort of a purpose, right? If you're harvesting electrons, what are you doing with that energy? Well, you're probably using it to power something. And there's probably all kinds of secondary and tertiary positive effects that come from that if you know what you're doing. So I have heard this, and I'm fully aware of what Christopher Dunn has done there. And I also heard that when he came out with this book, which I think was that in the late 80s he wrote that book?
It could be, I think it could be, I could look it up, or I don't have it right here, but it's somewhere in 1988, 89, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know he caught a lot of flack for writing that at the time, but as time goes on, like you said, people have started to take a good look at what he's written there, and and I know it's I haven't read it yet, but I know it's a comprehensive book because he is an engineer and a machinist, so he knows when he looks at something, he's able to determine why would you place it like that there? Why are these anomalies here? He's like, well, it could be this. And yeah, I think he's going to be vindicated for that extraordinary piece of work he did.
Yeah. And then you may recall this, you and I both read a lot. So sometimes you see something and you imprint it, but you don't know where it came from. So in my case, what really caught my attention about what Chris had to say about that issue of the second dimension and gathering telluric power was the issue of resonation. That something had to be under there to resonate with the telluric power in order to build the energy. Makes sense. Well, in my case, of course, I was bringing in alchemy of 9 dimensions, Pleiadian agenda, and all that kind of stuff. So you may recall, if you think about it, and I've got the book here, I can find the page, but in Alchemy of 9 dimensions, I did a drawing. I had my son, Chris, who illustrated it. I had him do a drawing of Chris Dunn's model for the resonating pyramid, and then my model for activating 9 dimensions. And Chris Dunn has never said anything to me about that because, of course, all these scientists need to be very careful about attaching themselves to people who are working with really esoteric theories. But if you think about it, it's a similar model, the way our bodies resonate with the second dimension and that energy comes through and creates power. And so you may have run into that by reading Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, which I know you. Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. I've read that book and I've also listened to it. It's you do a great job in that book. I mean, I don't want to derail from the other conversation, but I do want to just talk about alchemy for just 2 seconds here. You do a great job of explaining these very complicated ideas in a very digestible way for the reader, which is great for anybody that's interested in this and has a lot of questions. So I just wanted to say that. Can we talk for a minute about, well, you know what? Let me say one more thing. We just kind of like talked about the Giza Plateau for a second and how there may be structures going down possibly 2 kilometers under the ground. Can we just stop and acknowledge that for a second? If that is all true, and there are structures that go down 2 kilometers, this is now you're in another room with this conversation, because the pyramids alone are just a wonder of the world, right? Nobody knows exactly how they're made. Now, if you're saying that there's structures underneath that go 2 kilometers down into the bedrock, now you have a real problem for explaining what the heck was going on there all these years ago. So I just want to emphasize that, because that's an incredible thing to discover.
Actually, I don't have a problem explaining that.
Okay.
In the following way. It's another one of those things that's as obvious as the nose on your face, but nobody wants to notice it. The Giza Plateau discoveries of underground structures and rooms and tunnels going all the way from Romania to Egypt and to Iraq and to Tibet and to the inner earth. And this is a series of books that I covered in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions that have to do with these discoveries. But the facts are, these discoveries are real, and a lot of people have gone down there into these structures, and we know that, and we have information about that. So then, once it gets to that level of reality, then it starts to become possible to actually understand quite easily what really might be going on with these underground structures and then sacred sites like the Giza Plateau. Now, the sacred sites that we're talking about are known to be located in power points on this planet. That is, places where there's major vortexes and portals. And it's understood in esoteric science that when people are able to work with these kinds of complexes underground and then in the pyramid itself, that they have access to higher dimensions, which is another way of saying that those structures make it possible to reach portals and to get in contact with other locations. And so I think it's simple from the following point of view, Matt. The facts are we have some incredibly sophisticated structures on this planet in Peru and in Egypt and all over the world that we can't even construct right now. So then we have to assume that since they were constructed on this planet, that somebody had a way to build such sophisticated engineering projects. And then right behind that, as Chris Dunn said consistently in his book, they had to have power, and Ed Malkowski, who's another great scholar, they had to have tools and instruments in order to work with that power. And so these discoveries, especially under the Giza Plateau, the reason there's so much effort going on by means of the world management team or the global elite to not let people realize what actually exists on this planet. Because immediately once you figure that out, you then know for sure. And by the way, the time frame that I think we're discussing right now is the last 100,000 years. And in particular, for the building of the Giza underground structures, and for some of by the way, the Montana megaliths also have underground structures. So any place.
I wanted to ask you about that. But
yeah, and we're discovering more of them all the time right now. But the time frame for that culture, I really do think is 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. And then I think something happened, and there was a cataclysm in our solar system around 50,000 years ago. We know that. And so I think for some reason, probably cataclysms, a deterioration began. And so one of the things that's a struggle right now is to bridge that gap from like 50 to 25,000 years ago.
Mm.
which I think was a period of slow degeneration of these ancient technologies. In other words, a lot of people have forgotten about the existence of these things for a long time. And isn't it amazing to be alive at a time when
Oh
this
yeah.
memory, oh, I'm so excited about what's going on, I can barely stand it.
It's amazing, right? I mean, you entered this world at a time where these ideas were nowhere close to mainstream, nowhere close popular. I'm sure there was tons of ridicule and pushback. And so when I see researchers like yourself that have gone through this journey through that time and have had the longevity and are still doing it today, it is fascinating to me to see people that have persevered and have continued to put out quality knowledge about what is going on. Because today it's a little bit easier, right? You can have a podcast and it's okay to talk about UFOs. It's okay to talk about crop circles now. But if you did that like maybe 10, 15 years ago, you were setting yourself up for some serious ridicule. So yeah, it's great that we have people like you that have been championing these ideas for as long as you have. It's a real great treat. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, because it has been hard. And I'll admit that I've always known my whole life I would never be honored for my discoveries and opinions and all that. But the whole situation is so exciting.
Yeah.
I just think we're going to see so many people a lot younger than me, especially people between 40 years old, 40, 50 years old and down. We're going to see so much excitement with people understanding and even being adepts at this. I think we're going to see some children coming forth who actually really go, well, what do you mean you don't understand how to use that thing under the Buseji Mountain? I know what to do. I'll show you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's going to be happening.
And I think the more people take interest in these things and the more people open their minds to it, I mean, we know there's a thing called epigenetics, right? And so within a few generations, you could really start to see some very interesting human beings being born.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that, along with this other conversation of psi, people's abilities to connect with things that are, not physically there, right? Like remote viewing, psychic capabilities. If that becomes popular and that is affected through epigenetics, within a few generations, you could start to see a world that is completely different than what we have right now. I mean, you could imagine the legal ramifications for psi becoming a popular thing within society. I mean,
Mhm.
you start to rearrange the entire game when that happens. So I'm very curious and I'm watching that space closely.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I wanted to talk about catastrophobia. I mean, we started to touch on that a little bit. Can you talk about how, I mean, you talked about trauma a little bit in our last podcast, but can we talk about catastrophobia and how there might be this sort of long-term trauma that the human species may be experiencing because of something that happened in the distant past?
Now that everything is opening up so much, of course, I can see so much more than I could see when I wrote Catastrophobia, which, by the way, they retitled Awakening the Planetary Mind, the publisher did. But
Mm.
I don't like it. I like Catastrophobia also, because
Mhm.
Catastrophobia means the fear of cataclysms and the fear of catastrophes. And so, in the time that I was born into, right during World War II, the prevailing paradigm was that nothing fast or bad or quick ever really happened on this planet. Like everything was very slow, developed very slowly, and everybody was very safe. And that was called uniformitarianism. But then in the 1960s and 1970s, with Velikovsky and different scholars coming forth, people started to realize that there had been cataclysms in the past. And not only that, that those cataclysms had basically knocked us back to the Stone Age. And the one that I focused on in Catastrophobia, which seems to be the biggest one, is 9500 BC. That's 11,500 years ago. But actually, there were a series of three cataclysms, one in about 13,000 BC, and then 9500 BC, and then around 6 or 7,000 BC. And a lot of researchers at this point are starting to adopt that paradigm because fortunately we have at some of the sacred sites, you can, if once you understand what actually happened, and once you understand what the cultures might have been like that were destroyed, you can start to read the record a little bit better. And so if you go to some place like Peru, near Cusco, near some of the Great Walls and all that, if you start looking closely, there's 3 different levels of that stone technology. The huge polygonal stones at the bottom, and then a culture that had large stones, but not nearly as amazing as those. And then at the top, we get back to maybe 3,000 BC. The remains are, you don't see that this kind of huge stone.
Less sophistication involved.
Yeah.
As time
So
went on.
I'm finding, and I have a feeling, I haven't been able to check with conferences and all that to see where other people are waking up to this. But once you can see those 3 levels, and one of the interesting places, by the way, to go look at those 3 levels is in Italy. And as you know, I located a trilogy, a series of 3 novels in Italy because my characters were exploring this kind of thing. And it's interesting to me that Italy is one of the places that has some of the best evidence of these 3 phases of cataclysms. The basic theme of catastrophobia is that we went through these cataclysms and it kind of wiped our memory, and that we are, as I said in the book, that we're a multi-traumatized species that's waking up at the current moment. And so this is an extremely important thing to remember, because we may suddenly see a lot of panic about Three-Eye Atlas. We could. And I think the more people who realize that it's not about cataclysms now, it's about waking up and remembering who we were before. Because it's very difficult to become who we can be if we are just filled with blocked consciousness and blocked catastrophobia. So this is awakening has been hard. Like, my husband is a cranial sacral therapist, and of course I work with in healing also. And a whole generation of people our age have been healing because people are starting to bring back the traumatic memories.
Interesting. I just had one more question for you, Barbara. And it's about the tensions that are in like the United States at the moment. So we have like, there's a lot of anger, a lot of polarity. We see a lot of this on the news, which, obviously I think bad news sells, right? So we see a lot of this stuff perpetuated on the internet. Can you talk a little bit about how like the politics are affecting people, and where is this coming from? Because I think in your reading you mentioned a 4D aspect, like a fracture almost, and that we're seeing these effects play out in civilization.
Yeah. So in terms of the dimensions, the iron core crystal is the first dimension, and it connects us to everything that's cosmic. And then the second dimension, the Telluric realm, is the realm of activation of our planet, and it's the realm of magma and earthquakes and all this wonderful energy underground. And then the third dimension is the surface of our planet, which is linear space and time. So like right now, we're having a discussion in linear space and time. But as we interact in linear space and time, the next dimension is the fourth dimension. And the fourth dimension is by far the most complicated and difficult dimension for us at this time, because the fourth dimension, in order to carry people to higher and higher levels of consciousness, we have to resolve polarity. We have to resolve duality. We have to resolve the conflict between war and peace, between dark and light, between all those aspects of emotional duality. And so that dimension is extremely complicated for us. And so let's go back to after the cataclysm in 9500 BC. Okay, the cataclysm is finished. It's over. It was a series of cosmic cataclysms, and there's remnants of cultures and people on the planet. And people don't know how to grow food. They don't know how to deal with their environment. They don't know how to deal with each other. And then what happens is a certain number of people become leaders. And whether this is extraterrestrials that landed on this planet to help Earthlings, or whether it's simply that people on the Earth itself took power because they were more powerful than other people, I'm not sure that we really have the answer to that. But what we do know is that people took charge and then they wanted to be compensated for taking charge and doing all the work. And so people started collecting power and money in order to control the masses. And then once they managed to learn how to control the masses, they realized that as long as you can keep people scared half to death, they will be totally controllable because they'll be in a state of such fear all the time that they won't be able to do much of anything. And so this is a pattern that developed after the 9500 BC cataclysm, I think. And then it just grew and grew on this planet to the point we are now, where the global elite, the world management team, the planetary billionaires are determined to hold that power and determined to keep the money and the power. And they're going to do everything they can to keep any person away from figuring out how this thing works. Because if you adopt the 9-dimensional model that I described in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, everybody on this planet has one vote. Like my vote is as strong as Mark Zuckerberg's or Jeff Bezos' vote. And, Alchemy of 9 Dimensions is really a teaching book about equality. Because when people wake up and realize how much power they have, they're not going to put up with this anymore, especially, Matt, at this point in time, because the global elite is so totally destroying the fabric of reality that people need to depend upon, such as healthcare and housing and food. They are so aggressively destroying our reality that it's going to cause people to rebel. People are going to have to. By
Out of
taking
survival.
power. Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, we do live in interesting times, Barbara, and I'm glad that we have people like you that are out there that can really utilize the right brain and explain these things that are highly complicated. You do a great job of doing that, and I really enjoy all the conversations and the emails that we have, and I really wanted to thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. And I know we're going to talk again because this is just developing so fast at this point that we're going to have to. So we can look forward to talking again.
Well, thank you. Tell everybody how they can find you and what your website is and what you got going on.
Okay, my website is Hand, like hand, Hand, Clow, Clow, for Barbara Clow, 2012.com. Pretty easy to remember once you catch up on it. And what I do, our website does the usual stuff. And sometimes Jerry writes for it. And in my case, I offer a free seasonal reading, which means spring equinox, summer solstice, fall equinox, and winter solstice. Because at the time of the seasons, that's when the collective mind tends to interface and draw together so much. And so that's the time to address what's going to be coming in the next 3 months. And I'm using it as kind of a coaching device to get through this period of time, which I believe, by the way, completes itself in 2027. I
Very
believe
interesting.
we're going to have full contact with other dimensions by 2027.
You're not the first person who's told me that. There's other people that I know and trust that has expressed that same sentiment to me. And as someone who is just kind of on the outside looking in at all this, that is utterly fascinating to me when I hear people say that. I'm like, what does that look like? What is that? How is that going to be? And then it's so often that we have so many questions about what's the nuts and bolts of this going to be. And then before long, when the transition happens, it's just like, that's the new normal. So I'm just, I'm always fascinated when people say these things that sound so fantastic. And then a few years later becomes the new normal.
Yeah.
It's like we heard people say that there could be a global wide virus, a global pandemic. People were talking about that in around 2013, 2014. And then people were like, nah, that would never happen. But then it happened. And it was so wild and so crazy that that became the new normal. It
Yeah.
is interesting when I hear things like that. I love
And
hearing that.
speaking of the new normal, that's a good term for how when the fourth dimension finally works out all of that duality and all of that dark and light and starts to come forth with the new paradigm, then what happens is that paradigm becomes 3D, which is our dimension.
Interesting.
So much of our work right now is emotional with the fourth dimension, and that's why it's so hard. I don't think this is about great big cataclysms in the past. So I think this is an emotional cataclysm. And I'll just ask you one question. Don't you think emotions are harder than just being in 3D?
Oh yeah. It's one of the reasons why humans are so messy, right? It's because of our
Right.
emotions. It's
Yeah.
difficult for us to navigate that. It's
Yeah, that's right.
we have plenty of people on the planet that have a high IQ. It's the EQ that people struggle with, that emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And when you can combine two things together, you can get control of your emotions and have a high IQ. That's when we see people that do amazing things.
Yeah.
But Barbara, I'm going to put links to all your stuff in the description below. Again, thank you so much. And I want to thank
Thank
everybody
you.
for checking out the podcast. Bye,
Thank you.
guys.